Just give it a minute. I think it started. Oh, there it is. All right, we are in business. All right, good afternoon, good morning, everybody. I'm going to do a sound and video check. So in the chat box, wherever you are watching right now, please let me know that the sound is clear, that your video is working. We have had to become very tech savvy, so we want to be sure that all of it is working well. Okay, there's some responses so you can see us. Awesome. All right.
Yeah, that's okay.
Okay, so first of all, I want to say good afternoon, good morning, wherever in the world you are, and to send my love to you all wherever you are in these truly impossible and unimaginable times. I know that the level of difficulty wherever in the world you are varies, but we're all in this together. So I'm hoping that conversations like this one will offer some kind of light in your day. Our normal witty banter and laughter will offer some relief from just the humdrum of everyday life that we're going through right now. As we're talking, I encourage you to ask questions. There's a chat box on the right side of the screen. Throw your questions in there. When I get to the end of the conversation with my gal, I will go through the questions and I will try to get through as many of them as possible for Wana to answer for you. So she needs no introduction really, but I'm going to introduce this very special person. Wana is a storyteller, she's an artist. She works at the intersection of journalism, poetry, performance, film. If you know her, you know that she does any and everything that involves being creative. Her journalism covers women, culture, and the arts, with her work appearing on BBC, Aljazeera, The Guardian, any international media. She's a very big girl. She has been featured on CNN African Voices as an emerging poet. Her video work includes Nylon, which is an absolute favorite of mine, Warriors, and the archival project Culture Diaries, which archives the work and interviews of, I don't want to say lesser known artists, but artists who don't necessarily have large platforms and some who do, and has served as a really, really amazing sort of archive of where we were at a certain time. I happen to have a Culture Diaries interview that I look back on with such fondness. She travels, she loves to travel, we know that. She loves food, she loves wine, adventure. And these are the things that we love about Wana, because she still harbors this desire to do more. She wants to be an interior stylist and a lingerie model. I'll have to ask her if that still holds true, but I believe it. Her poetry interrogates memory, womanhood, healing, love, and reimagination. And she previously released 2 albums of spoken word, Dirty Laundry and In Memory of Forgetting. And today we are discussing the latest drop, this beautiful offering that is vulnerable, courageous. It is Transcendence. So please welcome my friend, my sister, my gal, Wana. You need to give us more volume.
Yay! Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, cool. Awesome. Yay. Thank you guys so much. And Titi, thank you for coming up with this idea of this conversation and hosting it.
For nothing.
Eternally grateful, but so excited at the same time.
It's my pleasure. I remember we were talking the other day. I was sitting on my couch and asking questions about the album just after I had listened to it. And I realized, I felt like that conversation was important to invite other people into. So I'm like, okay, let's suspend this conversation and why don't we do a live? And then I went about the business of figuring out how to do a live. Not as simple to do on YouTube as you would imagine.
No, I would have been rubbish at it.
But we're here and I'm so glad that we are and that it's working. And I hope, knock on wood, knock on everything, that it continues to be that way. First, I want to say that this album is right on time. And it feels like this very warm hug in a time when we're not allowed to touch each other. I'm grateful for your generosity of spirit and the courage that it took to write this work, to create it, and then to give it to the world to do with it what they will. Um, so I'll start off by asking, as someone who works in many mediums, so you are a journalist, you're a filmmaker, you're an actor, you're a screenwriter, all of this stuff. When did you know that it was time to create this particular piece of work? And could you walk us through what that process looks like, from the idea to writing the poetry to the recording before we actually see the final product?
So I think it was time for a third album, because I think my last album was 2017. So I was like, okay, I need a new body of work. And I feel like I had spent the last couple of years after that really just like committed to learning and growing. And I think I was going through like certain sort of internal transformations in my own life in terms of interrogating things within myself, experiences. And I think I just felt that there was a certain sort of level of growth that I had experienced internally, and then even sort of craft-wise in terms of just like learning the work and I suppose like freeing myself, right? But I think really the turning point, so there was all of that going on, but I think the turning point was 2019. So the first half of the year, I was going through this very weird kind of, I call it like, I don't like to call it depression, I call it like melancholy. So the first half of the year was just a very weird kind of melancholy that I was just like in. For the first time in my life, I was thinking of like, should I just not bother doing this anymore? And I've never thought of that ever. I'm always that person who just keeps going. If something isn't working, I'll find another thing to do, you know? Mm-hmm. If poetry isn't, there's no headway in poetry, I'll go and write articles. If articles aren't working, I will make a film. So I don't have enough, I never give myself enough time to even entertain the thought of giving up on something. Yeah. And so for the first time, like January, it was like January to almost May, I was just like, what's the point to this? Do I need to start thinking of other things? You know, I just felt something like just some kind of like clothes, like something choking you, and there was like no point. I didn't even feel like performing as well. Mm-hmm. I had no interest in performing. I had no interest in doing any of that. And then I think by June, like literally the first week in June, like this sort of cloud kind of lifted over my head. And I found myself just like spending that month of June, like meditating to July. And then I had a show, and then I was in England, in the UK for the summer. I had this show. My friend Ruth Tutoye invited me to perform at her show. And when I did that show, it was the first time where I lived for a long time, where I literally felt like my spirit leave my body. So, but the most important thing that happened in that moment, literally, it transcended. It was the first time on stage I just felt like that. But then I think the most important thing that happened that I was very aware of was that in that moment, I no longer cared about whether I was a poet or a performer, I just knew I was on the stage doing something. Mm-hmm. And doing something that gave me joy and felt like I was transferring some kind of energy, but it felt like it was beyond poetry for me. And so literally, I feel like that show was like my redefining moment. And after that, I think every other show subsequently that I had, I was just in this space where I found that even the performances felt like monologues or felt like messages. They didn't, because I didn't care about them being poems anymore. So I literally would be on stage and I would just be free, and they would be anything they wanted to be. They could do just a piece of work that I was on the stage delivering. And so literally, I think in that, after those months, I just knew that there was something different, something had shifted. And so even before then, I had this plan. I was like, oh, I want to do this album. And, you know, I've been listening to lots of music. I had all these different inspirations. When I decided to start writing the album in November. So after all the festivals were all done, Lagos Poetry Festival kind of closed out festival season. I just locked myself in the house the whole of November, didn't barely went out, just went to the gym and came back home. And it was just literally just writing all this work. And this was what was coming out. So it wasn't even like, I wasn't even deliberate, like it was just what was coming out. Throughout the year as well, again, part of this interrogation process, I was like journaling in little bits. So there were things that became poems from journal entries. and just like personal reflections and things like that. So I think that was just how it started coming together. So I think by the time I'd written like 5 poems, I was like, this is looking like this is what this is going to be about. And yeah, and I didn't even come up with the title Transcendence. So it was after my performance at Ake, our dear friend, Arit Okpo, said to me, but literally after my performance at the end, she said to me, man, Wana, you've transcended, oh. And she was like, you're no more a poet. Like she said, you're a griot. That was what she said. And literally I was like, oh my God, that is what this thing is. That's what's been happening to me. And so I think in that moment, everything started coming together. The name of the album was right. I was like, is it good? At first I was like, the year of transcendence. I knew it was something with the word transcending. That was going to be the time.
I think definitely, even just through the course of our friendship, this year, the last couple of years in particular, have felt like that sort of like transforming and transcending, just as somebody who's observing the way that you're moving through the world. And it is super reflective in this body of work that you've released. I think it's an interesting thing you say about performance and this sort of like out of body, spiritual, like alchemy that is happening in that moment, because it's definitely something that I have felt as well. I think often about performance as like an act of returning the poem to its natural place. So the poem starts in your mind.
Going back to its origin. Yeah.
You write it down, you do the thing that's out here, and then you put it back and then you give it to people. So I guess I want to know for you, why is performance sort of the most natural extension of the work that you do? Why is that such an important thing for you as an artist?
I think, I never thought about that too consciously, but I think that, it's part of this thing that you say where the work originates from inside your body. In a way, it's like the paper and the pen only borrow it from you, and then you literally return it back to the owner of the work. But I think that there is also something about the human body as this like recess of memory. So even there's this thing where like, even when your mind wants to forget, your body doesn't forget.
Yeah.
And I think there's something about that sort of physical exchange of energy. I feel like there's a kind of power in that. And maybe it's why we like fellowship and we like to gather, and we talk about this interaction and energies between people. Might be part of that as well. I've not consciously thought about that, but I think that there is something very powerful about the body, like delivering the work.
And it's interesting that you say that, especially in a time when like we don't have that experience of your body being present in the room with us. And so I can't think of a more perfect time for an album to be released digitally that comes into the homes that people are inhabiting and sits with them as though you were there with them. I think this album does that so powerfully. It's not just a recitation of poems, it's an actual performance in audio form. You feel like you are. I remember playing, I came downstairs, I played, my whole family, we held vigil, even my son, we listened to it. It felt like you were here with us in a time where we are miles apart. And even if we were in the same country, we wouldn't be in the same room. I wanted to talk about the collaboration on this album of music and poetry and the choice to work with our dear friend and brother, legendary jazz guitarist Femi Leye. Tell me how that came to be and why you knew this is the dude, like this is how this work is going to be.
I keep saying that I feel like my working with Femi was literally divinely orchestrated. So in my last 2 albums, Femi has contributed to it, but what would always happen is I would call him, Femi, okay, I need some tracks, and all of that. He would go produce something, send them to me. And so the producer who I'd normally work with, his name is Larry Adimeji, he would do all the chopping and everything in the studio. So Femi wouldn't be a part of that process. He just makes the music. He just makes maybe like 3 tracks and sends them to me, or 1 or 2, that kind of thing. I think last album he did about 3 different tracks and sent them to me. So this time around, Larry was like, he wasn't available because he had to be out of state with his family and all of that sort of stuff. And I remember I'd been calling him before the year ended. I was like, which was last year. I was like, Larry, let me know what's going on. For some weird reason, I just knew that I had this push and this urge for this album to be done at a certain time. I didn't know why, Normally, I'm not like, I'm very flexible with time and things like that. I'm always like, whenever things happen, it happens, you know, but I was like, this thing needs to be done by February max. Like, I was very insistent on that. And then eventually said in December, he said, oh, he doesn't think he's going to be coming to Lagos. I said, okay. And normally I would freak out because I'm also someone who is used to working with the same people.
Yeah.
I'm not a fan of just changing hands. And I'm not used to it. Like, I feel like once me and somebody have chemistry where we're good, it's I also stay in romantic relationships for a long time when I shouldn't. But yes.
I'm hot tea.
You know. So I really so the moment he told me, but for the first time in my life, I was very calm. I wasn't freaking out. I literally just laid and I was like, I kept saying, God, what am I gonna do? What am I gonna do? I just laid on my bed, I think for like 30 minutes. And then the next thing I said, something just told me, call Femi. And I just took the phone, I called him. And again, it was like, I could have just said, oh, Femi, I need you to make some tracks and then maybe call, I know a couple of other producers or whatever, or maybe just tell him to project manage it. But I just called him and I said, something has told me that you are going to produce my whole album. And he was like, what? He was like, hold up, wait a minute. I was like, yeah, you're going to do everything. I was like, you're not going to call anybody to do anything. And then, you know, I said this thing and I wasn't afraid. But when I dropped the phone and he had agreed to it, he was like, okay, yeah. He was like unsure, but he was like, okay, okay, let's see. You know, he was like, but a very like, let's see how it goes. And then I think after like I had agreed to it, I then thought to myself, I was like, oh my goodness, what if everything sounds the same?
Yeah.
So I was then scared, but for some weird reason, there was an ease in which we like locked like as puzzles. And so I called him, we discussed everything. I think I went to his house the first time, we had a meeting. We just had a meeting about things I was listening to. I think music that I liked, we talked about like her, we talked about Ibei, we talked about a couple other people as well. We talked about Solange. And then he went on to start producing and he just started working. He just went on it, started working on stuff. But I had recorded the poems on my phone and sent them to him, but he hadn't listened. So he was just doing his thing. And then he sent me some tracks, you know. I was like, okay, cool, sounds cool. Like it's the rudiments of what you're working on, you know. So just do your thing, you know. And then some days later, he messages me and he sends me a voice note and he's like, whoa, that he finally just listened to all the poems. He's like, he's starting from scratch. And then he started this thing where he was literally building a musical universe for every single poem. Yeah. I tell you that by the time he composed the music, he added my voice notes to the music. So it felt like an already finished job that I listened to before I had even recorded. So I had to know there was no correction, there was nothing. So I literally had two recording days and went to his house and recorded. And it was just a magical experience.
Shout out to Femi.
I never worked with that much ease in my entire life on anything.
Yeah. And Femi is a master collaborator. And I know that collaborations are so important to you in the work that you do. We'll get more into the other collaborations on the album a bit later on, but it was clear in the listening that something transcendent, not to overflog the word, but something spiritual had happened. So we're going to get into the work now. So the album opens up with this very jazzy intro, this upbeat family portrait. And it's our first introduction into this way that the album sort of like puts words and music that hold opposite but fully complementary spaces within the album. The music is like pulling you in one direction and it's kind of seducing you. And then the poem is unfolding like an onion and revealing something that is deep and has like real deep implications. And it tells you that this album is not something you can just, it's not easy listening. You can't just put it and go and do whatever it is. You have to kind of
drink. You need something hard.
You have to stop what it is that you're doing.
Everybody gets some hard liquor when they want to listen.
So I want to know if this was something that was a conscious choice that was made either between you and Femi or one or the other. And when you talk about this integration of music and poetry, why is that an important thing for you? Because you could make it a spoken word album and just speak on the album. Why is music an essential piece, or was it an essential piece for this particular piece of work? And also, was that choice to juxtapose the two things intentional, and what purpose were you hoping that it would serve?
So I think again, part of that sort of transformation process that we talked about, where I'm on stage and I'm realizing that it's no longer just poetry anymore. It's becoming something else. It's poetry, it's theater, it's performance, it's whatever it is. I don't know what this thing is, but I know I'm doing something, right? And I think that also started staying with me in terms of how I wanted to start approaching my art, especially moving into 2020. It was like we all had our plans for a new decade, new whatever. I think one of the things for me was like the theme in my work was like, I want to fuck up with arts. And that was what I kept saying to myself. I was like, I want to create work that feels free. Like it's free of form, it's free of genre, and even when I was saying that, I don't think I particularly completely envisioned what that would look like in the products. I just knew I wanted something that felt much more where even if I'm just talking, my voice also feels like I'm singing. Like I wanted my voice to feel like an instrument in this thing. I wanted the music to also feel like its own thing, but then none of it overtakes any of them, but they all just kind of like stand like level. But I just knew that I wanted to move into a place where I'm bending form in some way. So I think that in many ways, because I moved into the creation of this work with that at the back of my head, it was already happening. I think I really, really respect Femi as a musician. I also even forgot that Femi has also always been with us since when we started performing poetry, playing the music in the background with his band. So he's always been very acquainted with both, not just my work, but my performance temperament, where I can go and come up and down and those kinds of things. And so I think even he was also in a place in his head where he wanted to move his work into something interesting. And so I think we were both very much in alignment, like emotionally and spiritually, without even needing to like discuss it or talk about it. So I know he's the one that came up with it. He said, this track is going to be a jazzy track. He wants something very hard, Renaissance style. I was like, yes, sounds perfect. And then he goes, but I also want it to feel like the opposite of what is being said. I was like, oh, that sounds perfect. So literally when we got into, and then that's the thing, like even the music gives you something else in terms of how you're performing it. So when I got into like the booth and I started listening to music, it felt like it was a very happy track. And I was like, this is a very sad poem, but I have to perform it in a very happy and exciting way, but it's all these really terrible things happening.
Yeah, I think that's the sort of irony that
it was just a constant weaving where the music was weaving into the work was weaving into the music, and they were very much influencing each other.
Yeah, and I think it does so in such a masterful way. I think there's a sense in which you're being ironic, I guess, in the way that your voice is very sultry, yet you're talking about this family portrait and this home as a site of both trauma and healing, and how 25 years later you exist and still move through this space that was the scene of the crime, so to speak. And I know as a member of your tribe how much joy you have created in that home, in this same home, and how we have laughed and eaten and dozed off in the same way that you talked about in White Soup, how you eat till you are overflowing and you just kind of roll onto the floor. And you have, without a doubt, like reclaimed the space and told a new story of its existence. And it has become sort of even a sanctuary for a lot of people. So in what conscious ways have you done that? And what does it mean for you to have the memory of who you were be so prominent and present while you're trying to move towards this forward version of yourself? And in your art making, why is this exploration of memory, this reaching back, why does it play such an important role, both in your life and in your work?
So I think that, memory like informs us, informs a lot of who we are, informs a lot of, our experiences essentially inform our character, informs how we move through the world. So it's almost impossible for you to address even your present or your future without like dealing or understanding or interrogating your past in some way. And I think it's probably why I'm very sort of interested in memory. But again, as you say, I live in the same home, which is like a site of like majority of my trauma. And so you're forced to be in that space as well. But something that's very important to me that I started realizing recently is that memory can also be this foundation for reimagination, right? So, you know, with our work as artists, we're creating to either like write our way out of something, or creating our way to find, creating a way for us to get out of something, or sometimes even writing our way into something, essentially. And so I think that, and so for me, I really believe in like coming to terms with things. And part of that coming to terms allows you to now decide to reimagine what you want something to be like. I think that's why for me, like I always say, like the third act of the album is like my reimagination poems, where you have things like Lights On, and you have Revelation, and you have White Soup. So, you know, you have all these things that have happened in this space, but then you find ways to recreate joy and what you want that to look like. So I think, as the cliche goes, you know, we can't help where we've come from, but we can help where we're going. And I think it's about like you deciding for yourself how you want that to happen. And I think it's so important to reflect that in the work itself, because, you know, it's like, for me, it's like, I want the grotesque and the beautiful to sit side by side. I want sadness and joy to sit side by side, because that is reality. You know, we're always looking for ways to move forward. How do we move beyond? Some people, they do it through like for some kind of interesting forgiveness. So healing is always different for everybody. Some people do it through coming to terms with things. Some people do it through accepting things as they are. But I think the goal essentially is to say these things are part of who we are, but we can also decide how we want to move it forward.
Yeah. Excuse me. Anytime somebody coughs now in this post-corona age, it's like suspect. It's early, it's 5:30 in the morning. This is just my normal morning. Please, I beg. Morning stuff. I love that line at the end of the poem. So they don't say that I was impregnated by the ground. It like is heavy, 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 but also like
It's my lamp, so I need to just get back.
No problem. So it just sort of illustrates the ways in which like women are still, even in the aftermath, sort of like required to be in this performance of who they were, who they could be. It's not enough that this happened. It's also matters that people will walk into the house and see the photograph, and that sort of validates everything in some way. I just thought, what a brilliant way to end a poem like that. So in Things You Learned from Your Father When He Leaves, or Things You Will Learn When Your Father Leaves, is a poem that opens up with this wonderful metaphor about learning to ride a bike without training wheels. And riding a bike is this act that like traditionally is supposed to be this thing that a father teaches his child. And I think it's such a brilliant way to talk about the absence of your father even. And you sort of graduate this image into driving and your mother's insistence that a car is an escape route. It's a time machine from the horror of your past into another life of possibilities. She can't abide the idea that a woman doesn't know how to drive, which I've never thought about before, but it is absolutely right. Like a car becomes an escape route for so many people, or a home for so many people who have no place else to turn. So I want to ask, what escape routes do you build through your art? And what has been your carriage from your past self or your past life into the one that you desire? And what has saved you in art?
Ooh, this is a very layered question. Very layered question. Oh gosh.
So art is the vehicle now. Art is the car.
Yeah, I think art is definitely a vehicle. So I think I always say that like art literally saved me, because I think it was my outlet to, whether it's to understand things, to understand myself, but much more recently to understand, to help me in deciding where I want to go and what I desire. So I think it's doing that more now in terms of sort of like moving forward. I think one of the things definitely from my sort of past or my life that I think was always a very, would I say, overwhelming thread in my life was this idea, was survival. And I think I'm now trying to move into a place of thriving. and not surviving, not
Surviving.
surviving. I think that's sort of like the new sort of theme in my life. I'm moving past survival, because it's so funny. Survival becomes so automatic. You don't realize how long you're in that mode for, and how it influences every single thing that you're doing. And I think if I look at like even the poems that I've written before, where they were pretty much about documenting survival, right? And I think now I feel like I'm interrogating a life beyond that and how we like moving forward. I'm moving past surviving. And I feel like you can see that in things like Sister Circle, where you finally confront this idea of, you know, sort of self-sufficiency, and where you've lived a life where everything you're doing is to mitigate disappointment. Because everything is governed by fear. And so to say, how do we move from like living a life governed by fear to a life governed by desire? You know,
that's such a beautiful point.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely being reflected in the work now.
Oh, it is. So there's a line in the poem when you say, no anchor, no boat, no life jacket, you never stop moving. And this refrain of never stop moving goes on and on. But you're somebody I know who prioritizes rest, and you are like the minister of enjoyment. And it feels in many ways that you have found a way to stop moving. In fact, we are all sort of forced to stop moving now. Nobody's moving anywhere. So why is this Chop Life ministry such a key feature for you now, more than ever before? And in this year where everything has changed after this point, we all know that nothing is going back to the way that it was. What is it that in your moving forward, in your prioritizing rest and all of those things, what are you leaving behind? And what is it that you are riding toward?
I think, so I feel like I find that even in the pursuit of joy, I'm really simplifying my life now, which is so interesting, because when you're in this place of like, you're in this place of like sort of trying, again, this idea of trying to survive, all the things you want are so grand. They're always so grand, which is, I find it very fascinating actually. And then now, it's like I find that everything is really much, much more simple. You know, it's about like good health and about like joy and happiness and quality relationships and peace. So I think like those are really the things, and then like this, you talk about this thing about, mentioned this about stillness. I'm really, really interested in a quiet strength. A strength that doesn't announce itself into a room, doesn't prove itself, that doesn't explain itself, that just enjoys things, that just moves, you know.
That never stops moving.
So I think it's still about movement, but a different kind of movement.
I'm just teasing you. I completely understand. I wanted to set a reminder at this point. If you have questions, ask them in the chat box. When we get to the end of the conversation, I will go through them and answer them. And also the album is available any and everywhere you download and stream music. So if we're talking about stuff you don't know, that means you haven't listened and you should be listening. So go ahead and stream that. Shylock is the next poem on the album, where it's a bite-sized poem, but it's such a powerful poem. Where the last line, this idea of learning to mourn the living, is something that like rang a bell in my head, because it's something that resonates so deeply for me, as it is something that I'm quite familiar with in my own life, this idea of mourning somebody who's very much alive, but who chooses to not be a part of your life. How do you mourn the living, and how do you reconcile that loss?
So I think, I know we've talked about the idea of closure being a scam. Quite a bit. And I think it's part of that. So I'm more of, I think there's a point, you know, we talk about this like healing being, it's not very linear for everybody, different things, and you're discovering different things every time. And so there's a moment where you think like, you know, okay, until you only move forward after you've experienced some kind of forgiveness or some kind of, I don't know, whatever it is that this sort of fantasy we have in our heads. But then I found for me, it's really about being okay with what is, you know? sometimes it's not about it changing. It's not about anybody saying you're sorry. It's not about getting an answer or an explanation. Like sometimes you're never going to get any of that stuff. Yeah. But you just have to mourn the loss of something that is there, that may not want you, that may not be interested in you, but it's okay. And you may not be ever be able to understand or figure out certain things. But I think it's okay. And I think now it's now become something that has helped me in just dealing with other things in my own life, where rather than spend so much time digging into why this is not happening, or it's not happening the way you want it, but just making peace, I think.
Yeah.
So coming to a place of making peace and saying, okay, so in prioritizing my own sort of self or my own self-healing or my own self-worth, how do I move forward, right? Where it's not, everything is not constantly dependent on somebody else's accountability or what you're expecting somebody else to do for you, but how can I make peace with certain things and move on with my own life and move forward?
Wow. Yeah, that's real. Girlhood, which follows quite naturally after a poem like that, is this exploration of the relationships with our fathers being the first scene of the crime, so to speak. It becomes a framework for who we are, who we become. And this poem is about the girl before. It's sort of a love letter to this untarnished self. Yeah. And it is such a beautiful and painful thing at the same time. And this album, in many ways, for me, feels like a love letter to that former self and a chance to acknowledge what was and like chart this new path towards what could be. There's like a lot of possibility in this album. So what would you want that girl to know? And which part of her have you held close even now? Which part of her, most importantly, do you carry into the work that you create?
I think I definitely carry her sense of freedom into who I am now. And I think I lost that for a while and went back in search of that. Just thinking of myself, even as I was always a carefree child. I remember, everyone would always say the testimony of me was always that I was always playing, before any kind of self-consciousness. Even when I'd be told things that were not particularly pleasant to me, I never thought too much about it. I played, I did sports, I did taekwondo, I was friendly with everybody. So I think there was a freedom that I had as a young girl that I remember vividly. I was never conscious of, I remember even telling someone, it's like, I'm actually usually conscious of the fact that I think I talk too much, but as a child, I was never conscious of that. I was always the source of entertainment. People would come, Wana, come here, come and dance, and come and do this and do that.
I don't think that has changed. I loved it, at all.
So I love all of that. I love, so I think there was a time where I started getting self-conscious about that freedom, where you get to this point where you become aware of like constructions of identity as a human being, as a person, and what works in the world and what doesn't work in the world, and how you fit into those things, those categories that work and don't work. And you're like, okay, that's when you now start getting into the phase of I'm not good enough, and you start trying to adjust and trying to be malleable and trying to be a different person to different people in different spaces. And so I think for me, I've gone back to reach for that girl, and she's been, it's helped so much in how I approach my work now, because she never cared about what anybody thought or about her or said about her. So it's like, just do you, essentially. And so if there was anything that I would tell my younger self, really, it would just be, relax, everything's gonna be okay. Just relax. I feel, it's the one thing I keep saying, I held so much anxiety in my chest about so many things, and my thing is just relax, we'll be fine.
Amen. So Conversations with Your Mother is this beautiful illustration of daughters being the manifestation of their mother's greatest fears. I remember not that few years ago, but some years ago, I shaved my head completely bald. And when I walked into the house, the first thing my mother said was, "You did this to punish me." And I thought it was such a wild thing to say.
So heavy.
Very heavy. But I think it was the first time as an adult woman that I realized that so much of who my mother the ways in which she carried herself were tied to her children and the ways in which they move through the world, and how people perceive them, most particularly. So this poem is filled with hard things, but it doesn't feel like an admonition of your mother by any means. Both in the choice of the music, the texture of your voice, there's a kind of like full circle coming towards the moment where you finally face your mother as a woman and say like, say the hard things, but also acknowledging her own trauma and yours with forgiveness and grace. It's almost a mirror poem for White Soup, where later in the album, you're talking about her lavishing you with love, filling you up, asking you to eat until it bleeds from your nose. This is the same daughter that she's sort of accusing of spilling over. And so these poems are, it's to me, in conversation with each other. How has healing your relationship with your mother shaped you? And what have you learned about your own womanhood through healing that particular relationship?
I mean, I think so. One of the things is like, I think 5 or 6, about maybe 6, 7 years ago, I moved back home to live with my mother. And it's the first time you get to know your parent as an adult, as a human being.
A person, yeah.
As a full-fledged person. And so, every night again, we'll just about something or ask stuff. Like I realized I didn't even know my mother's like ambitions. Like I didn't know that she had like ambitions, like what her ambitions were, what she thought she would be, And I started asking all these like random questions when we're like talking or gisting or whatever. And then also I think you develop a different kind of compassion, understanding the time in which they came up, what it was to be a woman in those times where basically you were literally like commodity and currency. And so there were many things that made you more valuable in how you looked, whether you were light skinned or you were slimmer or you were, you had a flatter stomach, whatever those things were, but with longer hair as well, So like you start, I think you start to understand like the complexity of sort of womanhood. And even when people like, even now when we think that we're so woke and all of this sort of stuff, and I think sometimes we very easily like marginalize our own humanity.
Yeah.
In the process of like ideological beliefs, but then when you allow yourself to be a human being, you find out that you're pretty much the same as everybody else. And all we want is like love and desire and to be special and to be somebody and to be relevant, right? And so, yeah, I think my relationship with my mother for me now is really like, it's almost like you're facing your humanity face to face. Yeah. So beyond just understanding that this person is not just a parent, they're a human being and they're a person and they're fallible and they can make mistakes and they don't deserve to always be punished for that. That's another thing. Because I see a lot of like conversations that go around about like parents being so abusive or whatever. And sometimes I'm just like, like nobody is like invalid, like we're human, which means there's just crazy shit that's gonna happen at different points in time. Yeah. And nobody needs to be like held to like eternal damnation because they made one mistake or they didn't do something right or they didn't even have the tools or the knowledge or the language. There are many things that you understand is maybe their own idea of like care, but it's like tough love and maybe this is the way they think or they think it's something else, something is going to work. So yeah, I think really it's also made me kinder to myself. Right? Like it's also made me much, much kinder to myself. Yeah. But again, most importantly, understanding that as people and especially as women as well, like a lot of the time at the baseline, our desires are all the same.
Yeah. Someone said this thing to me after becoming a mother about how your children are also watching you grow up. And I think hearing that really changed the way that I approach motherhood, because it was like, I'm somebody's child too. I tell my son this every day when he's trying to kill me. I'm somebody's child and I don't kill my mother. So I definitely do understand now more than ever this idea of like giving people room to grow and evolve as human beings, even if they are your mother. Confidence. Sorry,
and extending grace as well.
Exactly. Extending a lot, sometimes a lot of grace, sometimes more grace than you feel like you're capable of extending. But
there are those moments you are just are driving me nuts. But
confidence is this beautiful nod to how when people tell you that you are confident is almost like this astonishing fact. How dare you be confident?
Confident.
It's
wow.
why For me, the nudity of the album, both in the content and in the cover image, is such a beautiful reclamation of the word. And this particular poem travels this painful road of like shape-shifting emotionally and physically to fit this particular image
Yeah.
by any means necessary. So what does confidence mean to you now?
Ooh, confidence, I think, so confidence for me, I think, so I'll go to what I thought confidence was supposed to be and
Mm,
then what I think it is now. And I think I thought it was this thing where there was an absence of fear and absence of vulnerability. And I remember, and I still remember there was a time where people would maybe talk about certain things about themselves and just go on and on. And I was like, you need to get over it and just like, just move on. I remember I would be very harsh about that. I was like, people need to just move on. Like we can't keep talking about these things over and over and over again.
mhm,
You know, because I think for me it was like confidence was like like leaving all this, like all your fears, all your insecurities behind, or in fact perhaps even like even masking them, like doing whatever it is you needed to do for it to not come through, right? Now it's so different for me. Now it's being able to acknowledge the insecurities, and keep and but also being aware of the life that you desire and keep trying and keep moving towards that regardless
yeah.
of how it is that you're feeling. But I think from confidence for me now is definitely acknowledging that. Acknowledging that if I'm feeling insecure about my body, acknowledging if I'm feeling lonely, acknowledging if I'm worried about never being loved or never being able to have children, whatever it is, like whatever those anxieties are, but being able to openly acknowledge that without having to hide
Without
or to
shame.
or to act as though I don't desire certain things.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's what confidence is for me.
We talk about this idea of desire a lot, you and I, this idea of being able to acknowledge that like you have desire
Yeah.
beyond this image of being a strong woman. Ha, this cough. Beyond
You know, you're not drinking water right now. So
this desire to be um this desire to desire, this desire to
yeah.
say I want, I need, in a world where for a woman to say I want, I need is like you are too much, you need to cool down, you know. So let's go on to sister circles. I think this is a nice segue, this idea of being able to acknowledge that you desire, that you want. And typically in this world, when we talk about holding people accountable, especially in the digital age, it's usually like this rough and brutal thing. It's without care about healing or hope. But I believe that really holding somebody accountable, there has to be holding in the accountability. There must be love, there must be a kind of cradling so that they can fall apart into something and then be made whole once again. This poem is one of my favorites from the album, and I'm curious to hear, like, in the chat box, let me know what your favorite poems are. We'll get to them. I feel like every hit it's a hit back to back, every banger. But Sister Circle means something particularly to me because I was there in this particular moment, and I remember having this conversation, and I thought it was such a beautiful demonstration of what it means to hold somebody accountable and to give them room to be loved in that moment. So tell me, in which ways are you demanding more in your life now? And how are you making, there's a line where you say you're making a masterpiece of joy. How are you doing that?
So before I even answer your question, I need to tell people about how Sister Circle came about. I think it's such an important thing to share. So because you were a huge part of that as well. So I think we had two festivals back to back, and we always have our little gatherings,
Convening. We
our little
convene.
convenings in my room. I know the first one was in Kaduna, and you were there, and a few other friends as well were there. Of course, our dear friend Arit was there as well. And so, it starts off with, we're just thinking, we're talking or whatever. And then people are like, well, what do you want? And after a while, you're like, why are y'all attacking me? So I was like, I feel attacked right now, guys, and so we had this sort of conversation, and, I'm talking about certain things that I desire in my life, and it's very incredibly uncomfortable. But then You know, there are people, but then you guys were like, you know, you deserve this and you deserve this, and why don't you say those things, you know, and all of that. And I think this intervention, so to speak, repeated itself again, 2 months later at Ake.
Mm-hmm.
And this time it was me, it was myself, you, Arit, and Adikper as well. And so
Wana.
So that's whose voice you guys hear at the end, Adikper review. And
it's line about. Sorry, go on, carry on.
and so I think it was for me, like, I think when I got home, like after that, I was like, I'd never experienced women care so much. You know, when oftentimes you spend time with your friends or whatever, and it's always gist, or so how are you, fine, the end. But it was like the how are you? And they saw through you and they were calling you on your bullshit. You know, like they were calling you your bullshit, but also saying, we got you, like, you know, and holding you while you fall apart and saying, we're going to get this back together, like, you know, that kind of thing. And so I thought it was just incredible, that whole experience. And then I think the bigger thing was about that experience was about allowing myself to be like loved and taken care of. And it was like, wasn't just things that you guys were saying, but you guys were giving like practical examples of things that I do, which become, again, survival and habits. These things become habitual. You're not used to asking for help. You're not used to receiving things from people. And they could be like platonic, they could be romantic, they could be anything. Mm-hmm. And so I think that was how like Sister Circle sort of came about. So I just thought I should let people know that first. And so you said, what am I?
How are you making a masterpiece of joy in your life?
Joy. Oh gosh. I think it's yes, because I say in the poem that, you know, they asked me instead of resilience to make a masterpiece of joy. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's one of the things I'm removing from I'm excavating from my life, which is like resilience. This idea of, oh, you're a strong person. Like, I don't care about that anymore. But I just want to, like, it's just, again, I think it's about being present. Mm. You know, being present in the moment, being okay with being vulnerable, being okay with saying, I'm afraid, I'm disappointed. I think being able to articulate your feelings without hiding them or feeling guilty about the way you feel, if that makes any sense. Because oftentimes we don't feel like we're entitled to our feelings, you know? So we always brush everything. I'm like, it's okay, you know, it's fine. It's one of those things in life. But then if you're disappointed, like saying, I feel disappointed, I feel heartbroken, and I think when you're able to admit to the things that are happening to you, you can now really start to like embrace and know the kind of joy that you want and you want to see and you desire.
So I feel like when I'm thinking about the ways that the poems were like sequenced in the album, it was so just as beautifully done as the actual work itself, because this moment of vulnerability leads us into an even deeper moment of vulnerability with Lights On and this very sensual poem where you are finally sort of getting this love that you deserve. And a space you can fall into, and this attempt of letting go of your trauma, of the voices in your head, so that you can actually receive that love without fear of being too much. And I think Lights On and the cover for the album feel to me like they're speaking to each other. So tell me about this choice that is both masterful at being sensual and vulnerable, but heart-wrenching. There's something about that picture. There's the warm colors, there's this soft back and the little peak of giving us cheekbones. And it's like, it's saying, come in, come closer, close your eyes and just rest. And it's sort of before we even listen to the album's first preview of like what we're going to get. Tell me a bit about your collaboration with Laki Ogunbanwo, who's a photographer, and Mina Lundgren, who was the creative director of the shoot. How did this cover come to be?
So Laki, I think last year I was hosting the Art Summit, and Laki was one of the sort of guests on the Art Summit, and he was supposed to do a presentation, but he said he doesn't like presenting. So I was like, you know what, I'll just interview you instead. And we had a great time on stage. And he was like, thank you so much. You made me feel so free, all this sort of stuff. And then I think I see him in December or something. And he's like, oh, I have this new shoot idea, or I want you to be in it. I was like, okay, you know, I didn't think too much of it. I think February came, he sends me a DM and he's like, oh, you know the thing we talked about? I was like, okay. He sends me an email. I read the email and he says, okay, he's working on this fashion project called Notion of Form. With this lady, she was a Swedish designer called Mina Lundgren. And so they're really looking at the body as a sculpture and the body as form. And you know, they said in email, you know, if you're not comfortable with certain parts of your body showing, you know, let us know and all of that. And I was like, I took like 2 days to respond to the email because I was like, I need to think about this first. Like, I know I've said this thing before that I'm very game taking like photographs of myself, like in the nude, but I was like, do I really want to do this?
Yeah.
I took like 2 days to respond to the email and I couldn't find any reason not to. So I said, yeah, cool. When are you guys wanting to do this? Let's do this. And so on the day of the shoot, it was strangely the most comfortable I had ever felt. So like they just made me like super comfortable. And then we're taking these pictures and I'm posing and all of these kind of things. And luckily he's just, you know, he's like a typical photographer. Yes! Oh my goodness. You know, he's literally shouting. Then she's like, whoa, how have you not done this before? So he's like gassing me up as well. I'm like, okay. You know, but it was literally, and I was like, I actually do feel, and I almost felt like, even in that moment, felt like a metaphor where I felt the most comfortable naked, and it felt like clothes were like almost like constrictions of the world on me at the time. And yeah, it just felt, and I think because maybe I'd been going through this sort of personal journey of vulnerability, and I don't know whether this was probably like part of this physical manifestation of these transformations that I was going through, where you have to literally take your clothes off. And I kind of treated it as that, I suppose, in a way. So I wasn't even, but it was one of the most comfortable experiences of my life. And I hadn't even seen the image because I never really look at images when people are taking them. It showed me, I was like, oh, okay, wow, it's pretty cool. Yeah. And then when I'd done the album, and I just thought, I was like, I know that these pictures are lacking to would be amazing. Let me ask if they'll give me one or two.
For the cover, yeah.
For the cover. And then I messaged them and they're like, yeah, sure, we'll send you 2 images that we're not going to use for the project. And they sent me those 2 images and I was like, ooh, this is just perfect, you know? And it felt like this very cosmic experience where the music to the poems to now the cover artwork or this Notion of Form project they were all just aligning and corresponding thematically, you know. I think that was kind of like, it was like, again, an ownership of all experiences, right? And not trying to cover anything. I think that that cover is suddenly a symbolism of what's going on inside the album.
Yeah, the stars had aligned, and there's a line from Reclamation where you say all the stars are inside of you, and it feels like in your life and work you're living on this idea of containing multitudes. And you bring this into your art making. You're switching forms, you're switching genre. You talked about just not being encumbered by, like, is this a poem, is this a song, is this a monologue, and just doing the work. So tell me, when you look over the landscape of the work that you've created in filmmaking, journalism, poetry, acting, screenwriting, what are you searching for? What are you reaching towards? And how do you want to be remembered?
Ooh, girl, this is heavy. What am I searching for? I think I just want, I think in terms of what I'm searching for, I think is just a space to express yourself as you are. Like, I think I'm looking for, whether that is telling my own story or telling other people's stories, but I think I'm constantly looking for people, for stories to just be okay as they are, where your ordinary is good enough. You know, who you are and how you come as is profound enough.
Yeah.
I think that's always what I'm searching for. And I think that's also why I feel like, even in terms of how I tell stories, I don't muffle it with complication, whether it's in terms of like craft, or I'm always looking for how can we present this thing that where whatever it is that you are is okay. I think in terms, that's what I'm always searching for, that just for us to be able to present our authentic selves as we are.
How do you want to be remembered?
How do I want to be remembered? Oh my goodness. I think I just want to be remembered as somebody who lived.
Enjoyment minister.
Yeah, live. I just want to live. I want to do what I want, enjoy what I'm doing, you know. And I know that life is not always pleasurable, but the point is that I just keep trying.
Yeah.
However frightened I am, however fearful I am, however insecure I feel, but I just keep trying. I just keep doing and just keep moving.
All right. We're coming on to White Soup, which is the perfect close to this album. It's a celebration. It feels like Femileye at his most Femileye-ness.
Yes.
And every time it comes on, my son breaks into a dance as soon as it comes on. It's a track that we all love in this house because there's something about it that feels just like a full circle. It feels like, okay, we have arrived, we've landed this plane. It reminds me so much of the ways that you feed people, both physically and spiritually. And this is clearly an inheritance that you carry. So what are you feasting on now till it, till it pours from your nose? What are you reading? What are you listening to? What are you watching? What are you feasting on? In what ways are you making room for abundance? Like, what are you taking in right now?
So what am I feasting on? I'm watching like just trash TV.
Amen.
I'm watching a lot of trash TV, just like having a good time. I've strangely been watching Cooked with Cannabis recently.
Oh yeah, I haven't started yet.
I've been watching that. I've been listening, so musically, I've been listening to a South African musician who
there's a South African in the chat. You should know that there's somebody from South Africa here.
Oh, yeah.
We'd be happy to hear that.
I've been listening to this South African musician called Zoo. And her name is Zuko, and her music is just amazing. And she does so many interesting things with her voice and like genres as well. So I've been listening to that. I've been really feasting on like my friendships, just enjoying my people, and it's so weird. Like we're in the time of like isolation, but I feel so much more connected. Like I'm doing, I'm video calling my best friend who lives in Jordan now. My other friend is pregnant. I'm just like calling her in the UK. We chat like every single day. I call I'm really enjoying my people, I'm enjoying my friendships so much. I think I feel incredibly lucky with that at the moment. Yeah.
Same here. I feel like that's one of the upsides of what's happening right now is that we're forced to connect and like really make time. And though that a lot of that connection is in the online space, but it feels different than like how online feels most of the time, because now you're video calling, you're calling on the phone, you're texting, you're checking in on people you haven't spoken to in years just to make sure that they're okay. I feel like I'm hopeful for who we become after this is over, even though it's a very scary time. I think it'll help us reimagine how we interact with other human beings. Revolution, and I'm going to open up for questions, comments, and favorite poems and all that in just a second. Revolution is a Jara, the Fisi at the end of the album.
It was you guys that made me put that on the album because I'm not gonna put it. It doesn't work. All of this sort of stuff.
For me, it was like it's a track that's it's mixed and mastered. It's produced. It's beautiful. And while as you mentioned, like it feels like it's separate from the rest of the album, but it's also like that last piece of like closing out the puzzle. This idea that like this album in itself is a revolution. The way in which you move through your life is a revolution. There's a line you have in one of the earlier poems about how you wear your indiscipline in your flesh. And I tend to think of indiscipline in women as a positive thing. So I'm interested in like, in what ways are you indisciplined and unruly in the way that the world thinks about us? In what ways are you like, messing things up for people and the ways that they perceive you? So revolution was necessary. I'm so glad that you allowed us to have it.
Thank you guys for forcing me to do this. My stubborn self probably wouldn't have.
I think I'm going to open up to questions and comments now. I had some more questions that I jumped over, but I don't want to keep us here everlastingly. But I want to say once again that this album is a beautiful masterpiece. You should be so proud of this work that you've put into the world. I think the work that you're doing emotionally, spiritually, mentally is reflecting so brightly in the work that you're creating and putting in the world now. So I'm just like super geeked and ready for your what next, if there is a what next, when there is a what next. I'm curious about where you're moving into and the spaces that you're choosing to occupy now. So tell us where we can find the work, where can we listen to it, what work can we find you, and then I'm gonna.
Yeah, so Transcendence is on it should be on every single platform now, from iTunes, Apple Music to Tidal, Deezer, Spotify. Some people have been asking if it's supposed to be on Google Play. It even says it's there, but if you can check, I'm sure it's there. But I think it's actually even on YouTube Music as well. So yeah, thanks to my friend Bisong, who helped me do a playlist to make it cohesive. So yeah, it's actually on YouTube Music as well. So you can listen to it anywhere you want to right now.
Beautiful. Okay, so I'm going to jump into the chat. I'm going to go over the favorite poems, some questions. We don't have too many questions, but we have lots of comments. This is we love you guys. Oh, great, great, great. Someone's tuning in from South Africa. Zanelle Ruth Madlazi, welcome to the conversation. So the first question says, will you ever look back at your experiences as being predestined so that you could create the work that you do? So I think the question is, do you feel as though the difficulties that you experienced, all of that stuff was so that you could create the work that you create?
I think so. I feel like, especially I'm a very big believer in purpose. I think that like art is my purpose in life. Storytelling in itself is my purpose. And when I look at even how I started writing poetry, which I don't know, I've said this a lot of times, so maybe I didn't talk about it this time around, but I literally started writing poems as a source of catharsis. Like I was 16, just started scribbling things on paper. I didn't think they were poems. I didn't know what I was writing. I just knew I was just like trying to code the things I was trying to say. And a friend of mine, read it and she was like, yo, this is like poetic. And then she bought a journal for me. And I think that started this conscious idea of actually actively now trying to study poetry, now trying to read more about it, because I did poetry in secondary school and it was quite trash, to be honest. It was very trash. So it was never something that I particularly was interested in. And so like as an adult, like late teens, I started to like read a bit more and just like continuously. So I think as a result of that, there is a part of my art making that is very, very much like from my inside. I don't know if that makes any sense. There's a large part of it that is not just this thing about being intellectually dexterous or about showing off language, but comes from a very, very deep place for me. And my work is very personal. Like it comes from a very personal place for me. And so as a result, I do think that because I had to go through that, I do think that there is definitely a connection in my experiences and how it comes out in art and that purpose. So I don't know that I'll change anything, to be honest.
Amen. People are loving Shylock and girlhood, conversations with your mother. Lord, this poem. Yeah, confidence is acknowledging the reality and the pride in the journey. People love Shylock, Sister Circle, confidence. Love, love, love it, especially your friend's voice at the end. Wana.
That a hype queen, somebody said to me.
A lot of people love confidence. And someone says the conversation has made me love the album more, and I can't wait to listen to it again after this. F.A. Paul Azino, our brother in Comrade, he says a toast to the easy camaraderie, respect and love that has attended this conversation. Congratulations, Wana.
Comrade, thank you.
He also is asking if he's thinking of Swim and Transcendence. Swim is my album, and the searing waves, they reflect, shape, and contribute to some of the most important conversations of the moment and perhaps open a portal for more voices. Are we possibly seeing a collaboration or a collaborative workshop and or album sometime soon? I'm open to any and all possibilities.
I'm open, yeah, we're open. We're always open. We're always open.
Lights on, the audacity to be vulnerable without fear of being too much. Geez. There's a lot of really positive comments in here. Are you, yeah, Cooked with Cannabis is an amazing show. Are you changed Ellen Upi asked, are you changed by your work? Do you write from a place of healed always, or is your work a part of the healing?
Oh, the work is always a part of the healing, I think. It's always reflection of where you are in your healing. It's funny because I look at I look at, like, In Memory of Forgetting, I look at this and how I feel like In Memory of Forgetting was just like snapshots of situations, right? Like snapshots of experiences and memories, like, or sort of quick photographic portraits, but there's sometimes in some ways, or just this wanting to be healed, this yearning to be healed. When I think of like Open Letter and this need for us to just like be whole again. But I think that like in this album, I'm saying it's okay to still not to feel broken at different points in time. If you think of like even Lights On, I call it like my reimagination poem of love because I'm trying to reimagine the kind of love I desire in my life. But at the same time, I still express the fears that are inside because I know that even when those things come, there's still moments where you're going to be like, okay,
Yeah.
and your old self creeps in again. And those are like realities. So I think that, the work is always it's the constant reflection of the healing and the journey. And sometimes that journey regresses, sometimes it progresses.
Amen. Healing is a constant rocking back and
Back
forth,
and
as we
forth.
say. um, lots of people have connected with this album. There's a lot of people saying, listen, I used to be this person who grew up sidestepping my feelings. Abiola says that, and I feel like no one cared for them. So dumping resilience and picking up joy and basking in it is such a big thing. She also loves white soup. This brings us to the end of our conversation. And I feel so honored to have had this conversation with you and to have extended a natural conversation between you and I into the world. Thank you for all of your comments. You can continue. The video will be on YouTube, and so you can continue
I
to
apologize for my
comment
light going off, guys.
and questions. It's all good. We love you just the same. I encourage you to stream this album, buy this album, download this album, and listen to it, share it with people, and support this amazing work that Wana has put into the world. We love you, Wana. I am eternally grateful to have you with me on this walk, on this journey through life and art, and to have you as a colleague and partner through what can be a really like rocky road, and to have somebody to chart that road with. So thank you for your courage, and thank you for your vulnerability and openness, and thank you for talking to me today.
Thank you for all your incredible and thoughtful questions. And just, I mean, again, we can't emphasize, like, even as friends, like our friendship has evolved so much over the past couple of years. Like, I always say you're my sister. It goes beyond poetry, but I think it's interesting that poetry connected us, but then we became so much more than that.
Amen.
And it's just, and even that has been part of like my healing journey, just being able to have people who can reflect and mirror at you, call you on your bullshit at different points in time. Be quiet when you are talking rubbish. I was like, okay. And I always say this to you, that that's the thing, one of the most incredible things about you, and I've learned that from you, and I try to extend it to others, is that you hold space for people. You just let them, you sit down and you let them go through whatever it is they're going through, go through that journey. And sometimes you just, in your very calm voice, say, have you thought about, this. That kind of thing. And it's like, and you find a way to just like throw the thing very quietly, and it sits in your soul, in the person's soul. So just thank you for always being yourself and being very incredibly generous.
Most welcome. It is my pleasure. Thank you all for being here. Take care of yourselves.
Thank you for everyone for
Stay
tuning
safe.
in. For those
Stay
who
healthy.
listen, we appreciate you.
All right. Bye-bye.